The camera opens on silence, broken only by the hollow echo of a spoon striking an empty mess tin. A soldier in the mud of Anzio stares down at the last crumb of his ration, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. The narrator's voice cuts through the cold. How could a nation of just 130 million people feed 11 million soldiers scattered across 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and the Pacific, while half the world was starving? It wasn't a question of appetite. It was a question of survival. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States produced and shipped more than 80 billion meals, enough to feed its entire army, Navy, Air Force, and allies, from the wheat fields of Kansas to the sugar mills of Louisiana. Every corner of the nation became part of a single, unstoppable kitchen. Factories that once built cars turned to building ovens. Schools trained dietitians alongside pilots. The canning plant became as strategic as the tank plant at Camp Shelby. Mississippi. A cook named Corporal James L. Henning once wrote in his diary, "We start at 3 a.m. and don't stop till the last pot is scraped. We're fighting our own kind of battle with ladles instead of rifles." He wasn't exaggerating. Every meal served behind the lines was a battle won before the fighting even began. By 1943, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps had perfected the art of feeding armies on the move. Food scientists designed 27 standardized rations. From emergency bars for paratroopers to portable ovens for jungle warfare, America had learned to turn calories into strategy, logistics into morale, and behind every soldier's mess tin lay an invisible army of civilians, farmers, factory workers, engineers, and homemakers who understood that food was no longer just nourishment, it was ammunition. The sheer scale defied imagination. 11 million soldiers, spread across 3 continents and 2 oceans, received meals that traveled more than 7,000 miles each, often through enemy fire. Convoys carried flour across the Atlantic under threat of U-boats. Trains thundered across frozen mountains toward the Pacific coast. For the first time in history, the act of eating became an act of defiance. A Marine on Guadalcanal once wrote home, "Mom, when I open a can of beans, I can smell the factory back home. It's like a piece of America in my hands." And that was the secret, the quiet miracle in the midst of chaos. America didn't just feed its men, it fed their hope. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It is. They called them the farmers who wore invisible armor. No medals, no parades, just cracked hands, dusty overalls, and a quiet conviction that the plow could be as mighty as the gun. In 1942, while Europe burned, 6.5 million American farmers stayed home to fight a different war. They fought drought, labor shortages, and rationed fuel. Yet their harvests broke every record in U.S. history. The wheat fields of Iowa and Kansas shimmered gold under the war sun, their combine harvesters roaring like bombers across the plains. From above, those endless rows of grain looked like battle formations, neat, disciplined, unstoppable. One Iowa farmer, Harold Red Jennings, wrote in his journal, "Every acre I plow feels like a trench. Every bushel I load feels like ammunition." It was no poetic exaggeration. By 1943, America was producing more than 250 million bushels of wheat annually, feeding not just its soldiers, but also Britain, Russia, and China. The government called it food for freedom. Even the towns transformed. Grain silos became fortresses of sustenance. Railway stations in Nebraska or Oklahoma saw freight trains stretch for miles, boxcars packed not with troops but with potatoes, flour, milk powder, and dehydrated eggs. In Texas, cotton fields that once made uniforms now grew soybeans for high-protein rations. Meanwhile, technology invaded the farm. Tractors replaced horses, fertilizers replaced prayers, and women replaced the men who had gone to war. The Women's Land Army, with 1.5 million volunteers, plowed, milked, and harvested under the summer sun, their bandanas soaked with sweat and pride. One of them, Mary Louise Harper, only 19, wrote home from a farm near Des Moines, "I never thought I'd wield a pitchfork, but when I see those soldiers in photographs, I think maybe this grain will reach one of them before winter." These farmers worked through blackouts, heat waves, and sleepless nights. In 1944, a blizzard hit the Midwest during harvest season. Still, convoys rolled on, the farmers loaded trucks with frozen corn by lamplight, their breath turning to mist as they whispered, "The boys need it more than we do." When generals in Europe spoke of unbroken supply lines, few realized they were referring to these nameless heroes, the men and women who transformed soil into survival. The camera lingers on a farmer standing alone in his field at dawn, steam rising from the warm earth. His tractor engine hums softly, like a hymn to endurance. He looks toward the horizon and mutters, "If the soldier starves, freedom dies first." In that moment, he is both warrior and shepherd, feeding the front lines of history. The sound of metal striking metal echoes through the factory halls of Chicago. Steam hisses, conveyor belts groan, and the smell of hot tin fills the air. Here, miracles are being sealed by the minute. Tiny silver cans, barely the size of a man's hand, slide past workers with lightning speed. Each one carries enough food to keep a soldier alive for 3 days. They called it the K ration, a small box containing biscuits, cheese, chocolate, coffee, sugar, a cigarette, and sometimes a packet of powdered lemon drink. It was light, compact, and unbreakable. Yet within it lived the taste of home, the smell of memory, and the promise of life. By late 1943, America's canneries produced over 100 million rations per month, an industrial rhythm that never stopped. The scientists at the Quartermaster Subsistence Research Laboratory in Chicago became culinary architects of war. Their mission compressed survival into a square meal no larger than a postcard. Captain Ansel Keys, the nutritionist behind the K ration, once wrote, "A soldier carries his country not just in his heart, but in his pack." That philosophy reshaped warfare itself. Food became identity. Calories became courage. In New Jersey, the Campbell Soup Company ran its assembly lines day and night, filling cans so hot that workers wore gloves soaked in cold water. In a Pennsylvania plant, an inspector found a worker had tucked a small paper note under the label of a meat can. It read, "Come home safe, whoever eats this." That single note traveled more than 8,000 miles before reaching a soldier on Bougainville Island, who reportedly kept the empty can in his pocket until the end of the war. The K ration was no luxury. Soldiers joked about its taste, some called the biscuits toothbreakers, but when the shooting started, that little box was a treasure. In the Ardennes, men fought for the last chocolate bar. In Tunisia, pilots kept the coffee packet like gold dust. Private Eddie Ramos, writing from Italy, described the moment he opened his first ration after days without food. "The cheese tasted like heaven. I could smell home. I think I cried into my crackers." Each can was a metal prayer, each label, a silent connection between front and homeland. In the jungles of New Guinea, the tins gleamed under tropical rain like medals of endurance. For a soldier lost in foreign mud, the hiss of a can opener meant survival. That sound was America whispering, "You are not forgotten." As night falls over the factory floor, the conveyor belts still hum. The cans roll forward endlessly, vanishing into wooden crates marked with black stencils, U.S. Army ration type, K, somewhere. A worker wipes her hands and sighs, unaware that her day's labor will become tomorrow's miracle on a distant battlefield. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of Burma, from the sands of North Africa to the volcanic islands of the Pacific, American soldiers shared one small comfort, a warm meal in a cold world. No matter where they fought, there was always coffee steaming in a tin cup, soup bubbling over a makeshift stove, and the familiar smell of bread reminding them of home. By 1944, the U.S. Army had built a global dining table that spanned 3 continents, 5 oceans, and 450 major bases. Its supply lines were an invisible web of trains, trucks, ships, and airlifts, all synchronized to a single purpose: no soldier would fight hungry. At dawn in Normandy, while artillery thundered miles away, field kitchens roared to life behind hedgerows. Corporal Frank D'Angelo, a cook from New Jersey, remembered the strange silence between explosions. You could hear the soup pots clanging, the coffee bubbling. It smelled like Sunday morning back home. For 10 minutes, you forgot there was a war. The logistics were staggering. In Europe alone, American forces consumed 24 million meals per day. That required 200,000 tons of food shipped monthly across the Atlantic, everything from canned meat to powdered milk. In the Pacific, cargo planes carried fresh bread to island bases like Saipan and Okinawa, where bakers worked under camouflage nets to hide from enemy aircraft. Even coffee became a symbol of defiance. Soldiers boiled it in helmets, drank it in foxholes, and joked that it tasted like gun oil and home mixed together, in the rain of Belgium or the dust of Tunisia. A sip of hot coffee meant you were still human. To deliver it, the Quartermaster Corps built mobile field kitchens, trucks fitted with burners, ovens, and water tanks that could move with the troops. Engineers even designed rolling bakeries, capable of baking 36,000 loaves of bread per day while advancing behind the front lines. In Sicily, a general once halted a tank column just long enough for cooks to serve spaghetti and coffee. In the Philippines, sailors used empty shell casings as soup cups. And in London, on Christmas Eve 1944, GIs shared turkey dinners with British children who hadn't seen meat in months. To the soldiers, those moments mattered more than medals. They meant that even as the world burned, civilization hadn't vanished, it had simply moved into tents and trenches. How did America manage to feed its men in every corner of the globe while its enemies starved? The answer was not luck. It was discipline, compassion, and an unshakable belief that freedom needed fuel and that fuel was food. As night falls over a muddy camp in France, a young private sits by a fire, clutching a cup of steaming coffee. The camera lingers on the rising steam as artillery flashes on the horizon. He whispers to no one in particular, "As long as I can taste this, I know we'll make it home." The thunder of machinery filled the air inside the factories of Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The war had taken the men, but the women stayed and the women built. In the glow of fluorescent lights, they stood side by side along endless conveyor belts, gluing labels, sealing cans, and packing crates marked U.S. Army Ration Type B. Their hair was tied back with scarves, their eyes red from long shifts, and their hearts heavy with unspoken prayers. They were the women who fed the army. By 1944, more than 6 million American women worked in food and supply industries. Some were mothers, some were widows. Many had sons, husbands, or brothers fighting overseas, in one factory near Toledo. A worker named Margaret Turner quietly wrote her son's name, Private John Turner, on the inside of every crate she packed. She didn't know if he would ever see one, but the gesture made her believe she was closer to him somehow. Her co-worker, Dorothy Larkin, described it later in a letter, "Each can I seal. I think maybe this one will reach him before Christmas. Maybe it'll keep him alive one more day." Their labor was grueling. The shifts ran 12 hours, sometimes 16. The heat from the steam lines blistered their skin, yet they refused to slow down. When one woman fainted from exhaustion, another quietly stepped in, took her place, and kept the line moving. To them, every pause was dangerous, not because of quotas, but because somewhere a soldier might go hungry. The factories became sanctuaries of purpose. Lunch breaks turned into prayer circles. Radios played big band music over the hum of the assembly lines. Some women pinned newspaper clippings of their sons above their workstations, so that every tin they touched felt personal. In December 1943, a shipment of 3 million canned rations left the docks at Newark, bound for Italy. Among them was a crate marked with a lipstick kiss and a note that read, "From Mom, with love." Soldiers in Naples later found it and passed the note from hand to hand, as if it were a relic. Even outside the factories, women carried the burden of the army's hunger. Housewives joined the Victory Garden movement, planting over 20 million gardens across the nation that produced 40% of America's vegetables during the war. They learned to can peaches, pickle beans, and stretch flour into miracles. A wartime poster declared, "The kitchen is your battlefield," and in those kitchens, women fought with spoons and patience instead of rifles and bullets. At sunset, when the whistle blew and the assembly line slowed, the women removed their gloves and looked at the crates stacked to the ceiling. They knew the food inside wasn't just nourishment, it was hope in a box. As the camera pans across the quiet factory floor, a single label remains unstuck, fluttering in the breeze. On it, a faint pencil line reads, "For my boy, wherever he is, tell me." Viewers, if you were in her place, could you have done the same? Would you have had the strength to keep sealing hope day after day, never knowing if it would arrive? The The ocean was both a highway and a graveyard. Every night, under blackout skies, convoys of freighters left New York, Boston, and Norfolk, each loaded with food enough to feed an army on the other side of the world. Flour, canned meat, coffee, sugar, milk powder, all stacked high in wooden crates stamped U.S. Army ration. Between 1942 and 1945, over 5,000 merchant ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying more than 17 million tons of food. It was the greatest logistical operation in human history. Yet few outside the Navy's supply corps ever saw it. Every voyage was a gamble against the sea and against death. German U-boats lurked like sharks, invisible beneath the waves. A single torpedo could turn breakfast into wreckage, and yet the convoys sailed, night after night, in silent formation, guided only by faint lights under tarps and whispered radio codes. Aboard the freighter SS John Bascom, a 23-year-old seaman named Edward Eddie Carlson wrote in his log, "We haul beef and beans instead of bombs." But make no mistake, these crates are as deadly to Hitler as any bullet. His ship crossed the Atlantic 5 times in 1944, narrowly avoiding submarines on 2 of those trips. Once, in the midwinter fog off Iceland, the crew heard the distant echo of an explosion. One of their sister ships, carrying 15,000 tons of rations, had been hit. The men stood in silence as debris floated past cans of beans bobbing among the waves, their labels washed pale by salt and smoke. They called it Operation Vittles, the campaign to keep the front lines alive. Some convoys lost a third of their ships, yet replacements were always ready. American shipyards built 1 Liberty ship every 42 days, ensuring the flow of food never stopped. Even the Pacific route was perilous, from San Francisco to Manila, through Typhoon and Coral Reef. The supply ships moved in endless chains. In one mission, sailors fed 5 entire divisions on Guam, using floating kitchens, barges fitted with ovens and stoves that could bake bread for 60,000 men at a time. To protect the cargo, gunners stood watch at dawn, hands trembling not from fear but from cold. On deck, a cook poured coffee into tin mugs and passed them around. He said quietly, "Drink fast. Boys, this might be the last hot cup before Germany runs out of gas." Every crate that reached shore meant another day of strength, another mile of advance, another letter home. A general later wrote, "Our soldiers never fought alone. Behind every rifle stood a ship, and behind every ship stood a kitchen." As dawn breaks over a gray Atlantic, the camera pans over hundreds of ships, stretching to the horizon, waves breaking softly against hulls heavy with bread and hope. If you had been one of those sailors, staring into the fog with 1,000 miles to go, would you have kept going? Would you have risked your life for someone else's meal? The war was ending, but the hunger was not. When the guns fell silent in 1945, Europe was a continent of empty cupboards and hollow faces. Cities lay in ruins, farms were fields of ashes, and millions of civilians stood in line for a single loaf of bread. And then, once again, it was America that fed them. In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces liberated Germany, U.S. Army trucks rolled into towns not with tanks, but with bread. Operation Vittles expanded beyond soldiers. It became a mission to feed a broken world. Each truck carried 10 tons of rations, each ship 1,000 tons more. The same factories that had once packed food for the front lines now packed for refugees. In Frankfurt, a captured German officer was interviewed. When asked what shocked him most about the United States, he said quietly, "You Americans never went hungry." His voice cracked, not with anger, but with awe. That single sentence became an epitaph for the war's logistics. America had not only outproduced and outgunned its enemies, it had outfed them. The nation that never starved had defeated empires that rationed crumbs. At Dachau and Buchenwald, liberated prisoners, some weighing barely 70 pounds, were given their first warm meal in months. Medics wept as they handed out soup. One nurse wrote, "They trembled when they smelled it, as if afraid it might vanish." In the ruins of Warsaw, American field kitchens fed 40,000 civilians a day, while in the Pacific, Navy ships distributed 200 million pounds of food to the starving in the Philippines and Okinawa. Food had become America's new diplomacy, a peace offering that needed no speeches. Even former enemies joined the effort. Thousands of German POWs in the U.S., who once harvested crops for their captors, were now sent home, carrying cans labeled "Gift of the American People." Many wept when they saw them. One wrote in his diary, "We came as enemies. We left as men fed by mercy." The psychological transformation was profound. Soldiers who had survived on K rations now served soup to orphans. Commanders who had led divisions now watched farmers plant wheat in bomb craters. Feeding others became a moral duty, a redemption after destruction. By 1947, the United States was sending $13 billion in food aid under the Marshall Plan: wheat to France, corn to Italy, milk to Japan, in every port. The crates bore the same stamped words from the people of the United States of America, and somewhere, in the quiet corners of memory, an old general's confession still lingers. You never went hungry. As the camera fades, we see an American soldier ladle soup into the hands of a German child beneath the ruins of a cathedral. The light catches in the rising steam, turning it golden. The child looks up, whispering thank you in a trembling voice. That was how the war truly ended, not with victory parades, but with the warmth of a shared meal. The story of how America fed 11 million soldiers across 3 continents is not only about logistics and numbers, it is about faith. Faith that a meal could carry more than calories, that it could carry identity, hope, and even forgiveness. From the plowed fields of Iowa to the frozen docks of Antwerp, from the humming canneries of Chicago to the storm-beaten decks of Liberty ships, every spoonful was a message. You are not alone. Keep going. In the quiet decades that followed, veterans would still remember the taste of those rations. Some said the chocolate bars were too hard, the biscuits too dry. But they also said that nothing ever tasted so alive again. One old Marine once told a reporter, "When I open a can of beans now, I still hear the sea." For him, that sound was not hunger, it was home. Behind that memory lay a greater truth. America's strength during the Second World War did not come from its factories or weapons alone. It came from its conviction that freedom should never starve. The army of cooks, farmers, and factory women had proven that victory could be measured in loaves as much as in battles. When the world finally emerged from the ruins, the act of feeding became its first act of healing. The same supply lines that once carried war began to carry mercy. Ships that once sailed under fire now delivered milk and wheat to children who had never seen peace. And perhaps that is how history should remember this story, not as a tale of armies and empires, but as a testament to what humanity can do when compassion becomes strategy. The war was fought with guns, but it was won with bread. Tonight, somewhere, the descendants of those who fought may sit down to dinner without thinking about the miracle that makes such peace possible. But every warm meal, every quiet table, every shared loaf owes something to that generation who fed the world so it could stand again.